Be live. Hey, what's going on? Chris Eischen here. This is the Modern Dad Council, and today we are going to talk about Common Core. There's a lot of things that you see or hear about in the media related to Common Core, and a lot of negative thoughts on it. So I have with us today Alex Chapman. He is a principal at Monroe Road Elementary School, and Samantha Ballman, a girl on the Modern Day Council today, and she is a newer teacher and she teaches kindergarten. So we're going to have them on to kind of give their perspective of what Common Core is and kind of get rid of some of the myths that are out there and get some facts straight. So, Alex, you want to start off, kind of introduce yourself, and then maybe kind of kick off?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Alex Chapman. I'm a principal with Bedford Public Schools. We are located in Monroe County in southern Michigan. And in the state of Michigan, we've kind of adopted the Common Core slowly in the state of Michigan. We were one of what would be considered a Smarter Balanced Consortium state, meaning that we were supposed to adopt Common Core and transfer from Michigan state curriculum to a national curriculum. And then the state legislator about 18 months ago completely backed out of the consortium. So basically they said you can still teach to Common Core state standards, but you're really not going to test on it. And we're not going to provide funding for testing. So in Michigan, I think that's where I can provide a really unique view of, because we're kind of one of these states that's in the balance that we're teaching the Common Core state standards, but we're not assessing them, which puts us in a rather unique situation in comparison to where the rest of the country is.
Oh, very cool. Interesting. How's that differ from what you're doing in Ohio, Samantha?
Um, we have adopted it completely. I have been a kindergarten teacher for 3 years. I have been teaching Common Core all 3 years. Our school adopted it in K1 2 years ago, my first year. In the last 2 years, we adopted it for the whole school. So we've been teaching Common Core. We have the testing. It's the PARCC testing in our region, and that's probably the hardest part about all of this is the testing. So I'm kind of jealous of Michigan a little bit that they get to teach to the Common Core, which is the fun part of it. The testing would be kind of the difficult part. It's caused a lot of funding issues for our school. It's caused a lot of other complications in testing it. This is our first year actually testing, and I know they've had a lot of complications, but it's been fun and interesting in that aspect. Luckily, I don't teach a testing grade, so I don't really have to go through as much of that as other people would.
Well,
Cool.
uniquely here in Michigan, so we used to take, for 43 years, we took a test called the MEAP test, the Michigan Educational Assessment for Proficiency Test. And that was the standard Scantron paper pencil test. Well, as we were supposed to transition to a Smarter Balance, for a little background, so there's basically two consortiums when it comes to Smarter Balance. You're either a PARCC state, which Ohio is, or you're a Smarter Balance state, or you're neither, which some states have completely opted out of the assessment. In Michigan, we were supposed to be a Smarter Balance. The legislator wouldn't pay for the test, so then the state, the Department of Education had to create basically its own Common Core assessment, and we start taking it when we go back to school on Monday, and it's called the M-STEP. And so basically, it's a very Common Core test. It's just like the PARCC or like the Smarter Balance assessment, but it's exclusive to Michigan. So we're in kind of a unique situation where we're teaching Common Core again, but now we've got this M-STEP test. It's an online test that's pretty much level to Common Core state standards with a little bit, in Michigan we call them GLICs, grade level content expectations, or Huskies at the high school level. But these were state standards. These were Michigan high standards content expectations, and now we've transferred to Common Core. So we're kind of in a little bit of a tricky spot in Michigan, but we all are in the United States.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I have to say that I like the way that Common Core works. I don't feel like it's that much different than the old Ohio standards. They're just, your technique of teaching is just different. The way that you look at the test is different. I know that some of the kids, I did OA prep with third grade my first 2 years of teaching, and then we took the PARCC the trial park just to kind of see how it would look as teachers. And I honestly don't feel like it's that much different. The biggest difference is using the technology. There's a lot of buttons we weren't really, like, oh, how do I do this part? How do I do this part? Only because it's new, not because the kids wouldn't know how to use it. That makes sense.
So let me back up a little bit here, okay? Because that's a lot of information, and to me it's a lot of like teacher talk. Like you got like the husky and this and the that. It's like I don't know what the hell any of that stuff is. So let's kind of back up and go back to the modern dad perspective for a minute, and kind of maybe get a little bit of our perspective of what we think it is, and then you can kind of chime in with corrections.
Absolutely.
Thomas or Eric, either one of you want to jump in and start off with that? Thomas, I know that the whole premise of Common Core came from a fairly heated kind of discussion that we had gotten into. So I'm going to start off with you.
Well, I mean, I have
kind of maybe share your thoughts of what Common Core is.
Sure. I've heard a lot about it, but my issue is with sort of the whole idea of standardizing anything for education, because, and I know you have to have standards that you measure students against to evaluate them in some way. But as the father of a 12-year-old who is an artist and a creative person, and that's where his talent is, that's where his skill is, that's where his interest is. And this is a kid who scores lower on the standardized test that he's taken. Trying to remember what they're called now in Connecticut. The ones he's taken the last few years. They just changed it. Now they're taking SBACs.
Now hold on. If they're going to standardize something, maybe they should start with the name.
Yeah. So they're different.
They're the Smarter Balance Consortium. So when you hear SBAC, that's what that stands for. The SB is for the Smarter Balanced Assessment.
Right.
Okay.
And so this is the first year that they're doing the SBACs, which are different from the ones that they took in the past. So already you're going to have a challenge comparing one to the other. But I just wonder whether this is the best way to evaluate, where kids are. I mean, we're living in a world where standardization is not necessarily the answer to productivity or having a growing economy. We're living increasingly in a world where individual effort, where uniqueness, where being able to share your creativity, your creative vision, being able to do something that no one else can do is what makes you a truly productive citizen. Because if you can just do stuff that everybody else can do, then eventually your job is going to get commoditized and outsourced, and a robot or a computer program will replace you. So that's where I think our focus should be in the educational system, is on finding these individual talents for kids. And I know that's hard. I mean, that's really hard for teachers to do when you have 20 or 25 kids in a class. But ultimately, I think that's the challenge.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this isn't a perfect tool. And I don't know that it was intended to be, though. I think that the goal of this, whether it be a park or Smarter Balance, but the Common Core in general, was to create a nationalized standard for expectations when it comes to content. So, some of the misconceptions about Common Core is that it's a curriculum, when it's really not. It basically gives you an expectation or a standard of where a kid should be at a certain age or grade level. And then school districts, whether it's in the classroom, at the district level, or even at the state level, they have their own opportunity to teach that standard as they wish. Some may use a program called Everyday Math to teach that standard. Some may use, old school paper, pencil, Mad Minutes. There's really no method as to how to get to the end point, but they just want to ensure that all the kids have a basic skill set that to ensure that they can compete both at the college and career level, both nationally and internationally. So I think that, you know, I see your point but I don't know many states that are penalizing kids that do not perform well on these standardized tests. The intent is to basically create accountability in education so that the schools, you know, that aren't teaching the appropriate standards are held accountable, and the ones that are, you know, that you can basically distinguish between the two. Like, you know, where I'm at in Michigan, I can't compare my students or my school in terms of achievement or growth to Toledo, which is only 2 miles away, because we're apples and oranges. We're not teaching the same standards in Michigan. We weren't taking the same tests. But I could compare, you know, hundreds of miles away in Mackinac, I could compare our school with the school in Mackinac or in the Northern Peninsula. So hundreds of miles away, you know, a 5-hour drive. But I can't compare our school to a school 2 miles away.
Well, I think it depends on the type of comparisons that we're trying to make. I mean, and you know, I'm talking sort of in the abstract here, but to me, if I were going to compare two schools, I would go walk into a classroom, and I would say, and I would observe, and I would say, are these kids inspired? Are they lit up? Are they enjoying what they're doing? Are they coming out of that classroom feeling like they, you know, they've really learned something that they can take and use, and they're excited about it, and it's presented to them in a way that's engaging, versus maybe another classroom in another school where the kids are sitting there and they're like, oh my God, I am so bored that I have to learn this stuff. And so, you know, I don't know that the performance, I'm not knocking the test, because I think you have to have those kinds of standards, but I don't think
that has nothing to do with the standards, though. That has to do with the teachers, and that has to do with their energy level. But and you know, that goes with teacher evaluation, not with student evaluation. And part of being a teacher is you not only have to I get observed on what I'm teaching, also how I'm teaching it. When they walk into my classroom, are my students engaged? Are they doing what they're supposed to? Do they understand what they're being taught? That is part of the teacher's job. That's not a part of the state picking standards of which they should teach. So I have things that I'm supposed to teach. Now it's up to me to make it so that all of my students learn. Does that make sense? And also part of the reason why they came up with this is there were states that were failing. There were states that were doing exceedingly well and states that were failing and on all academic areas. So if we have something similar across the whole nation, then we don't have to worry about states failing. Our government, you know, we're failing states by not making sure they were doing what they were supposed to. So that's part of why we have a national, that's why they wanted this. Now, I think it's, in theory, idealistically, is every student going to get the same education because we have the same standard? No, but it's a move in the right direction, I believe.
But do we know why those states were failing? I mean, is it because they weren't hiring good teachers? Is it because they didn't have budgets? Is it because people weren't just weren't trying? In other words, if you have a school system that's failing to educate the kids, just setting up a standard and saying you have to meet this standard.
But those states might not have had expectations quite as high. I'm not sure exactly which states were which, but there are some states, you know, by the end of kindergarten, you know, they expect them to be reading at a certain level, and there's other states that I just expect you to know your alphabet. That's a big difference. So when you go into first grade, where's your next standard of learning? Is it, how high is that next level? And so some states weren't expecting quite as high levels as some other states. So because of that, they're coming out of graduation, you know, they're graduating from high school at an 8th grade level compared to a student in another state. So you're going to college expecting all kids to have the same exact level of education, and some kids are coming not being able to do so.
Right, yes. States have historically controlled education, whether it's funding or standards. And this is a real strong national effort to create parity from state to state to ensure that students are receiving an appropriate education. So, for example, in Michigan, we had pretty high standards, not the highest, but some of the, we were on the upper end of, I guess, above average is how you would classify us. In Connecticut, where you live, you actually had really high standards. You could go to a state that didn't have such high standards, like 10 years ago, like a Kentucky, for example, or Alabama. These were low-performing schools with low standards. And now, today, creating this Common Core Consortium has allowed states to create parity and have common expectations. So, and the standards that were adopted were those of the higher performing states, like the New England states.
Which is probably why I feel like they have a lot of, they're not as accepting to this new way, because the way that they were doing before was working, and their standards were high. So it's not going to, it's really just a change in the way that they're teaching, not necessarily what they're teaching. And so I feel like that's probably why in a state like Connecticut, you would see a lot more of that frustration, or in a state that was maybe had really low standards before, how they would have a lot of frustration as well, because now I have to teach my kids twice as much as I used to. Like, how am I going to do that?
And then to speak to that, so now you have these experienced teachers that have been teaching for 30 years, and now they're saying, oh, now you've got to teach them all of this too on top of what you've already been. Oh, I don't know how to do that. I've been doing this. So all this change that's being requested. So maybe that's what we're seeing in the media. Eric,
I feel like most people aren't really accepting of change, and this is change, and so I feel like that's more of where the pull is the fact that it's just change, more so than what Common Core really is. It's like, oh, we're changing our education system. We're changing it from the 1960s. Why wouldn't we change it from the 1960s? Why would we not change standards that people 40 years ago, that my mom learned the same standards as me? That doesn't make any sense. You're telling me that the world in 1960s is the same as it is in 2015? No. So why wouldn't they change it? Why wouldn't they expect more from our kids?
Yeah, and some states have really kicked back. You have 7 states that are unwilling to adopt these standards. So you have big states like Texas, for example, has said no, we're not going to do it. Just north of Texas, you have Oklahoma. We're not going to do it. Alaska's not going to do it. Even close to us here in the Midwest, you have Indiana recently, a couple of years ago, they said we're just not going to do it. And over 90% of a school's funding comes from the state level. So if you as a state decide not to do it, yeah, you're going to lose some funding, but some states would rather just ignore and there could be some repercussions at the federal level. You may lose federal funding by not complying with this act. So there could be some repercussions. That'll be interesting to see what happens to those 7 states. Sure. But they're holding their own right now. So you have 43 states plus the territories. So places like District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam. These are states that also have to adopt these standards. But like Puerto Rico, they said no, we're not going to do it. Guam said they would. So it's interesting to see how this thing's played out over the last few years.
And I feel like there's some more states that are considering pulling out. But I feel like that's going to take, the more states that pull out, the more that it's going to take away from the purpose of what it was. So how are we going to see if it works if we don't all try? Is at least try, to see how it works. Is my, because I know Ohio has talked about pulling, and at this point, I've only taught Common Core, I've only taught the Common Core standards. That's all I personally taught.
Hey Sam,
the last 3 years.
Sam, you're kind of breaking up. You're kind of breaking up.
It's probably where I'm at.
Okay, I was just letting you know. Sorry. I was saying, go ahead and talk and see if it comes back in. I was just
saying that we can't see how it really goes until it actually works the theory that they've come up with, unless more states are part of it. And more that back out, the harder it is to be able to see if it's going to work. That everybody needs to go in and try their best, see what happens, and that's the best way to find out if this is going to work.
Okay. Now, Eric, you've been sitting quietly through all of this. I'd love to hear your thoughts and where you're at right now.
Well, there's a statistic, or there's this quote that I sort of butcher, but I sort of, whenever I talk about education, it's the quote that comes to mind, which is, only 20% of students learn the way that information is taught in the public school system. And on the flip side, 80% of teachers are those who learn very well in that modality. So I think, hearing a lot of what Thomas was saying earlier is like, I've got 3, kids who are all dancers. They spend, I don't know, 20 some odd hours rehearsing dance, when they could be doing homework and getting ready for their Common Core tests,
Right.
And the choice and the modality that tends to really have them come alive is physical, is kinesthetic, and so as a parent, I'm all for that. And
Can I make a statement to that?
Sure.
I'm just thinking, just for example, I have a student, anything with song, you can remember.
Hey, hold on,
Anything
Sam,
that has to do with
Sam,
What?
you're breaking up. Turn off the video and just do audio, and see if that helps, so that
How
we
do I
can
do
at
that?
least. There should be a button on the top that has an X over the
Better?
a camera.
Is that better?
Yeah, so go ahead and talk.
Okay. What I was saying is I have a student that he learns solely by song. Anything that I teach via song, he'll remember. He tells, and he'll sing it in the hallways, he'll sing it when we're doing something else, and that helps him learn. So he's going to learn that way. I know that as a teacher, so therefore I am going to do things while I teach, so that's the way he learns. He's going to learn it as long as I do a song. So for your children who are dancers, they're kinesthetic learners, if their teachers should be doing something with movement, knowing that their students learn that way. And we are taught that as teachers. It's not something new. If they choose not to do that, that's something that I feel the teachers, because part of Common Core is the fact of let's learn it all these different ways, and whichever way fits you the best, that's the way that you should go. I might have a strategy that doesn't work for you, but so-and-so might have a strategy that you love, and that's what you're going to use every time.
So with the testing and stuff, is it on one strategy, or is it just the answer that they're looking for?
No, here's a problem. You solve it however you want. That's your choice on how you solve that problem. Here's a problem. If you would like to do it this way, go ahead. If you'd like to do it that way, they don't tell you have to do it a certain way. It's 2 plus 2. What is the answer? You can figure it out however you want.
So is the real issue here with Common Core kind of and this is kind of directed to you, Thomas. So is the real issue kind of that we're focusing like saying that our kids have to meet these standards in reading, writing, and arithmetic, as opposed to their passion being in something else, that they're forced to focus so much on the other?
No, I guess I see it as a both and. I definitely see the benefit of having a national standard where you say if a kid has completed 6th grade or 8th grade or high school, that you can have some degree of certainty that they've mastered certain things, and that they won't have to have remedial classes in college or whatever it is. I don't think that's inherently wrong, but I think that we have to supplement that. We also have to focus on the individual talents and self-expression of our kids, because ultimately just developing a group of kids, future adults, who have just mastered a certain curriculum level, if that's all they've done, if all we can say about them at the end of a certain period of their education is they know how to do X, Y, and Z, that's not enough. that's not preparing them for what I see as the 21st century future employment. They're going to need more than that. They're going to need to be in touch with who they are and what their unique abilities are and how they can contribute. And they're going to need to understand that all this stuff that they've learned, okay, so there's the basic framework there, but they need to take that and express that and find something that they can do that is unique, that makes them indispensable, that makes them irreplaceable, or else they will go in, or the, I guess the point I'm trying to make is we need to be looking at this from the perspective of, are the jobs that we are preparing our kids for by getting them to this particular standard, are those jobs actually going to be there by the time those kids are 22 or 35 or 45 or whatever, or are we preparing our kids for a future that isn't going to exist at that point? That's the question I'm trying to ask.
And I think that there's this presumption and perception out there that you can't have it both ways. You know, that basically that schools that have adopted the Common Core state standards are no longer going to put emphasis on the arts. And that's just not the case. I mean, the Common Core state standards really only deal with math and ELA, English Language Arts. Now, the ELA does have a component of social studies, history, and science infused within the standards, but they're just as skill-based as they are content-based. And so I think that there is a cognitive effort by these the groups that have created these standards that make them skill-based so that the students have skills. Because realistically, let's say a 5-year-old, you know, Chris, your daughter Izzy, we can't predict the job that she'll be doing in 25 years because it may not even exist yet. So unless we have a time machine or a crystal ball that actually works, we can't predict what skills she needs. So all we can really do is teach her how to read and do math well and be a good critical thinker. And if she can do those things, she will be prepared as a 21st century learner. I just read an article this morning about, you know, how Google hires people. They don't even look at if you can do the job right away. They used to only hire MIT, Harvard, Yale kids. Now they hire kids from all over the country because they're looking for a certain, you know, I think they call it, are you googly? Basically, are you like-minded? Are you a good problem solver?
Right.
Are you technical? And do you have the mindset? Are you like-minded like them? And if you are, you will get along well in their system. But if you're just a 4.0 kid who can do math really well, you're probably not going to make it there.
One of my favorite part of the English Language Arts actually is they have a speaking and listening strand is what they call it. So a portion of the standards that we have to teach are on public speaking and being good listeners, having those ability to talk to people and those kinds of things. And I really, really enjoy them. The only problem is I feel like my school has really kind of taken off the focus on those speaking and listening portions of it, but it's really an interesting piece of the Common Core standards is that now we're trying to teach our kids how to speak in front of people, how to take in what the information that we've learned, and how do we recreate that. And I feel like that is something that's going to be really necessary for our future generations.
Thanks, Samantha. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, yeah, there's a whole bunch kind of flowing through me just as a parent, you know. What I love about my kids' schools is that they ask in advance. They survey the parents and they say, what would you like, you know, for your child to experience this school year, and you know, what are your goals or what are your outcomes? And I always say I just want them to stay curious, you know, and I feel like and I think that kind of goes back to, are you googly? You know, like I feel like you know, I was one of those kids that excelled in, you know, in school, in that modality, and school was my safe haven. I loved it. It doesn't mean that I agree exactly, you know, how things are, you know, going and the direction things are going, because I'm an entrepreneur and I don't want to teach about job readiness. I want to teach about apprenticeship, and I want to teach about entrepreneurship and, you know, what mechanisms there are for finding kids' passions, and how do we do that at the elementary and middle school level, so that the kids not only have a set of people who believe in them and accept them, but also a set of people who can really hear what they're about, especially when sometimes parents are putting external pressures on the kids, above and beyond what the Common Core wants.
Right.
And I guess the other challenge I have is that it seems like Common Core testing is more about being an evaluation tool for the teachers rather than a tool to really assess where a child's passions are. So I guess that's my big what's kind of effervescing in my system right now.
Right.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that because I feel like Eric and Thomas, you're both speaking to a similar point in that there's a lot of focus on the learning instead of teaching about how to know more about themselves and how their unique abilities fit into the ever-changing world.
Right.
So, Alex, can you kind of speak on that and speak to like?
Well, I mean, like the standards are so vague that I think that they do provide an opportunity for kids to become artistic. Like, for example, I have them, right next to me here. Some of the standards from 3rd grade all the way to 12th grade are as vague as choose words and phrases for effect. Now, these are in the ELA standards. Choose punctuation for effect. I mean, I think that I don't know how this has become so demonized. These standards, in that they hinder student individuality and create robots. Now, I could see if the standard said use this sentence and gave us basically worksheets, these kind of drill and kill worksheets, but it's not the case. Use punctuation, comma, parentheses, dashes to set non-restrictive elements. Maintain consistency in style and tone. I mean, these are pretty generic standards that aren't that high level, but also hold schools accountable. And when you're sending your kid to a school 180 days a year for 7-8 hours a day, I think it's realistic to expect that your school is going to basically teach your kid how to use punctuation. How they do that, the Common Core state standards do not say how you have to do that if you have to create these robots. And any good ELA teacher would create individuality, but asking them to teach the kids how to use verbs correctly and use tense correctly, I don't know if that's unrealistic, and I don't think that it hinders individuality either.
Well, go ahead.
It doesn't, but I guess maybe the concern, and maybe it's unwarranted, I don't know, but you hear this phrase all the time, the teachers are teaching to the test. And so if you have this as the standard, you have this set up, the kids have to just do X, Y, and Z, and teachers are doing that, and they feel like, well, okay, if I've done that, I've done my job. I don't have to do more than that, I don't have to do less, that's what I have to, and the schools are being evaluated, and that the school is considered to be doing a good job and succeeding if a certain number of students have gotten a certain score on a certain test. And again, to me, I think you have to have other measures. As long as you have other measures of evaluating schools, as long as you have people coming in and taking a look at those classrooms and saying, are these kids really learning? Are they really being inspired? Or are they just bored out of their gourd, but they've mastered these particular skills?
Yeah, so that's the sad part, in states, in Michigan, and not all states follow the same culture, but in Michigan, we rank our school by percentile ranking. And my school is ranked in the 94th percentile, which we're extremely proud of.
That's great. Yeah.
But that number is derived from what they call a Z-score. And in the state of Michigan, it's all about test scores, unfortunately. So here I have this beautiful building. It's gorgeous. Our school, the culture's phenomenal. We have so much going on. No one's walked through my building because there's 3,400 schools in Michigan. Right. So you factor that through, the 300 million people that live in the United States, and think about what a task that would be to measure schools this way. I would love if there was a qualitative piece to that evaluation where they would come in and they would look at my parent survey results and what the parents are saying, or look at how clean is the building, what are you doing that creates this excellent culture? But unfortunately, they only our measurement is derived from where we are supposed to be. So they give us a basically there's an expectation score,
Right.
and if you meet or exceed that expectation, you get a high ranking, and if you don't, so you may have some of the highest scores in the state, but not get a good percentile ranking because you may have actually fell short of the expectations that they had set for you. So it's a pretty unique situation here in Michigan, but I agree. I would love for somebody to come into the school and look and evaluate and see, you know, all the great things we're doing and use that as a baseline. But unfortunately, it's all quantitative. It's all X and Y's and ones and twos.
See, that's interesting because I actually work at a charter school, and they do come and observe us. They come in once a year, and our school gets ranked within the other schools, and that's based off what we call our 6 measures, which is parent satisfaction, economic sustainability, character education, academic achievement, new school development, and shared values. So we go through all of those things, and our school gets ranked based off that. And so ours isn't just about the academics, being a charter school.
Now, is that within your charter network, or is that in the state of Ohio?
No, it's within our charter network.
Okay.
There are 70-something schools across the nation, and so they'll have a team that comes in and evaluates us, and then we get a letter grade based on each portion, and then at the national forum, they'll go through the schools that did the best in certain things, and then they share ideas of what are you doing to make this such a successful school. How can we have those ideas as well?
Great.
So it almost seems like it's fallen more on the teachers. So Alex, is there some sort of, like, are you involved in the hiring as the principal, or is that done by
we are. We hire at the building level. Most schools do, and then you need to get approval basically from your central office and school board. But they, you know, almost always go with the recommendation of the principal. So basically what happens when we hire a new teacher is we create a team. So if I have a second grade position that's open, I'm going to pull together my other 3 second grade teachers, and I'm going to interview them with myself, maybe bring in a couple parents. I've even brought in students in the past when I was a high school administrator. And then we go as far as we have the first interview, we call it a perceiver. Then we will call them back and have another interview, maybe have them teach a lesson, so that we can ensure that we're getting the most qualified candidate. Because it's not about, you know, these, at the end of the day, it's about the teacher in the classroom.
Right.
I mean, you can provide all the technology in the world, you can provide every standard in the world, but if the teacher isn't embracing that culture and doing things correctly and really just meeting the needs of kids, then they're not going to be successful.
Right. Yeah, I think that Google-y factor would be big in that hiring process.
It sure is. You have to find like-minded people. You know, at my school, we're all about bringing parents in. We're all about college readiness. You know, if you're not on board with those things, if you consider parents in your classroom to be a nuisance, then you're not cut out for my school. So you could be the best teacher in the world, but if you don't have that same like-mindedness philosophy, then you're not going to be part of our team.
Right. Very cool. All right. Well, go ahead.
Well, I guess I want to say that I feel more encouraged. You know, I feel like there has been some demystifying going on in this, you know, first 40 minutes of this conversation, and I just want to, you know, kind of level the energy, because, you know, I didn't come like loaded for confrontation. You know, I came as a parent who, you know, just really you know, wants to kind of hold the space for other parents, to, you know, who are just as concerned about, you know, the hearts, souls, and, you know, minds of our children. And I feel like it's important to be on the same team. You know, I mean, I was homeschooling my kids for a while, but they're back in school, and I'm fortunate that there's an alternative community school that happens to have my last name, but no relation. But you know, 2 of my 3 kids go there, and they are loving their experience. On the flip side, there's a lot of kind of a lot of the students are individually making the decision to opt out of a lot of the standardized testing. So I think that's where it's not really backlash, but like the kids are actually supporting their teachers and saying, you know, this experience is not going to be best evaluated by my performance on this test. So I mean, I feel like there needs to be some constructive pushback, because, but you know, what Thomas was saying is what is felt a lot, you know, in the world, like, you know, that there is a lot of perception out in the world that says that teachers are teaching to the test, and you know, not by these, you know, not by this conversation. I don't hear that, you know, and I'm really inspired and encouraged by what I'm hearing. It's just that there's still so much public perception that says that the test is what rules, you know. I mean, and I'm kind of a rebel too, because I'm wondering what the point of college is. You know, college readiness is a question mark for me too. You know, I don't think it used to be just the assumption, you know, and now I'm like, why are we spending this money on what, and what, like, you know, if you want to learn stuff, there is Google, you know, look it up, you know. So I feel like there's still an educational lag, you know. I mean, as encouraged and inspired as I am with this conversation, I still feel like, you know, what part of the future are we really shaping here, you know? Because I mean, from what I've been learning, like, education, the way it currently still is to make people ready for jobs that existed 20 plus years ago, not for the ones that are about to happen 20 plus years from now. So I mean, I think we're in this, you know, interesting transition space, and I don't envy any of your jobs, you know. I mean, although I'm inspired that you're in them. So I mean, like, you know, I'm in this like mid space where I'm not trying to be confrontational. I just want to be helpful and ask you, like, how can I hold the space for what you guys are trying to do, and how can we get more people to jump on board and give you all a getaway?
Well, I think as a principal, you know, it's a unique situation that I'm in here, you know, kind of in a spot, kind of defending the Common Core, something that, you know, we fought in schools for a long time in public education. This has been a major paradigm shift in education, going from a state, you know, 50 different states having 50 different curriculums, or standards, I should say. I shouldn't use the word curriculums. I should use the word standards. To now having, you know, an attempt by the federal government to provide one expectation for all 50 states. And so it is a paradigm shift. So it's a unique spot for me to be in, kind of, you know, I guess kind of defending it. But I think that because we've embraced this for the last 5-6 years and we've prepared ourselves in schools, I do see the benefit. And I see on TV all the time, you know, concerned people, you know, that are really. I've seen math questions, for example, on social media. I'm an engineer, and how am I supposed to teach my kid to do this? And you know, I don't really so much blame Common Core for that as I do the teacher that assigned that particular math problem, because it's probably unrealistic to assume that standard exactly called for that particular problem. Mm-hmm. But it's a unique spot, and there's a great website. The Common Core State Standards has put together a website that is very user-friendly, and I would hope that if anything comes out of this, that parents can go onto their website. It's corestandards.org is the name of the website, and it is so user-friendly. It has you can download the actual standards and read the standards for yourself. You can look and see which states have adopted the standards, which haven't. What particularly the standards are, I've got it. There's a myth versus fact section, which is kind of the topic of today, and you can look at what exactly is what people are saying in the media, in particularly, and what's actually the truth. At the end of the day, I think it's hard to disagree with the fact that to have kids that are prepared for college, work, and life by having strong ELA and math skills isn't that you know, big of a deal. But there is an opt-out. You know, you talked about opting your kid out. A lot of parents are doing that right now. I know in Michigan we need 95% of our kids to take that test. So if opting out becomes a national trend, we would be in trouble. So, and it's all about growth. If you perform to one standard in 2014 and you make growth in 2015, that's the goal. You know, I don't think it's so much about achievement in the schools as much as it is growth.
Well, and I think the key is, if the more that you have, and I think you'll agree with this, Alex, the more parent involvement that you have, the less we have to worry about these standards, because we're in the classroom, we're seeing what the teacher's teaching, we see how these kids are responding. So if you have a huge concern with what's going on with your kids and the Common Core standards, get more involved. Right. I mean, that's kind of my thought process.
Even more than being involved, I feel like part of it would be learn, be educated on those standards. What standards is your child actually learning? Understand what the Common Core actually means. You know, listening to something like this will help you understand a little bit more about the Common Core. But I think it's more than just. I think being involved is super helpful, and it's a right step, and it's a step in the right direction. But more too is understanding what the Common Core is. Understand what your kids' standards are, so that you know how to help them at home. More so, and go to the classroom, see what the teachers are teaching. I know a lot of people who have open door policies. Go in, check it out, find out what's going on. That'll help you better understand for your own kid.
Yeah, and I get where parents, you know, philosophically, like our dads right here, you know, where you have some philosophical issues with the kind of the standardizing of American education. But, you know, I always encourage people when they're a little bit frustrated with, I guess, the standards themselves, as to which ones do you not like? You know, which standard do you think is inappropriate for your child to learn? Because regardless of what job they'll be doing in 2030, 2040, or 2050, solid math, reading, and writing skills will never go out of style.
Well, the only reason it'll go out of style is if they actually get turned off by it, you know, too soon, you know, because they weren't inspired. And I mean, this is, you know, I think this is where I'm more encouraged by how things are taught than what is actually taught. You know, I mean, I would love to know that my kids are being taught in song, if that's what lands. You know, I mean, that is probably the biggest takeaway that I've gotten from this conversation so far, regardless of what the standards are, to know that there's flexibility to teach my kids in the modality that they best learn in. That makes my heart sing. No pun intended. I mean, but you know, I think what is really the challenge is that, you know, I'm kind of a hippie with a haircut that needs one, but you know, and so like what I want to do as a father is I want to model what it means to go after your dreams, you know, and I've read books like The Element and The Happy Child and a lot of the other kind of, I don't know, rebellious kind of books who, you know, who really talk about what in education needs to shift and how we can create a sea change in the environment of education. And I think that, you know, what I'd like to see is a shift from the word education to the word inspiration, because that's what I want my kids to come out inspired from their school day. And I'm so grateful that my kids are where they are, because they are coming out inspired. And so, like, you know, something's going right, and I celebrate that. You know, I don't want to be confrontational, but I do want to, like, celebrate that, like, you know, there are teachers that can teach in song, and if there's flexibility for that, amen. You know, yay.
Yeah. Well, I can give a great example of you know, focusing on an individuality and creating an artistic piece using one of the standards. There's a measurement standard at the elementary level, and it's one of the 4 major standards. One of the so our kids, you know, they go down to the cafeteria and they're flying airplanes, and then they're using self-created rulers to measure, and it's all based on the standard of measure the length of an object by using an appropriate tool. That's the standard. It's so generic. What a teacher does with that standard determines what kind of classroom your kid's in. A teacher could do something as boring as pull out a ruler in the classroom and have all the kids do a boring activity, but a great teacher is going to take your kids down to the gym, have them fly an airplane or create some kind of cool little car and roll it, and see who goes the farthest. And those are the things that I think distinguish a good teacher from a bad teacher, regardless of whether we're using Michigan standards, California standards, Texas standards, or a nationalized state curriculum. Measurement's going to be in every single second, third, fourth, and fifth grade classroom. Why not make it fun? And these standards will not, I guess, contain a teacher or put them in a bubble.
Well, I just wish all teachers, you had to be a teacher, it had to be your passion. That's not the case. Anybody can be a teacher. You could be a teacher if you want. All you have to do is go to school. And I know a lot of people, when I was in college, they failed out of something else, so why not go into education? That's the easy field. Well, they fail miserably at it, and they hate it. And because they hate it, that protrudes to the kids that they hate it. And that's what I don't like to see. With my colleagues, I've seen colleagues come in who are upset about something, and then that goes on to the kids, and that's not education. So I wish in an idealistic world you would only be a teacher if that was your passion, and you can see who has it as their passion and who doesn't easily.
Which would come across in that hiring process, right? So hopefully you have a principal like Alex that's making sure that they're bringing the good teachers in, which is probably why that school's ranked so high, right, Alex?
That's right.
That's right. I'll brag about my daughter's school. I don't have a problem with that.
Sam, I think you also, brought up this this really interesting point because, and it's one of the worst quotes that I remember sticking as a kid growing up through college, which was, those that can do, those that can't teach, and then it, the one went further is those that can't teach Jim. And that's, I remember that, and I remember sort of laughing and sort of, getting that, except for the fact that, I agree,
It's sad.
It's so important to have a passion as and be passionate to be a teacher, because it's such a valid role, and I really commend what you get to do with the souls of tomorrow. So, I'm just inspired to know that there are teachers like you out there and principals like you out there, Alex, that are taking this to heart, because it's really good to know.
Well, I watched a documentary. Sam will probably help me remember what it was called, but this guy goes to the best schools in the world.
Inside Man.
Inside Man, yeah. With
the guy from Super Size Me.
Yes,
Morgan Spurlock.
There you go. And so he goes to this school in, I can't remember the country. It was like
Norway? Something
like that.
Yeah, in Denmark, Sweden, they have the best schools in the world. Well, some of the best,
Yeah. So he goes in and finds out exactly, how is it that you've reached this high, amazing standard of teaching, right? Well, here the teachers, for one, are paid like $100,000 a year, and to be a teacher, it's not a matter of just going to school. You got to go to school, and you've got to jump through hoops. Like, it was a chore to become a teacher, and you get ranked on how participative. Is that a term? Your class is. So if your class isn't engaged and not, they're all sitting there at their desk, boom, you're gone. You can't be a teacher if you have that kind of involvement. So maybe that's kind of where we need to start setting some standards, is get the focus more on the standard for the teacher as opposed to or the standards of which they're teaching.
And when we evaluate teachers here, our evaluation system has come so far. It used to just be about numbers and how kids were performing on tests and things like that. Now we go into the classroom and I walk the walls, if you will. I'm looking for student artifacts, points of pride on the walls. I'm looking for student engagement. I'm looking at how well kids transition from activity to activity. I'm looking at technology in the classroom. It's so much more than just how kids are performing on tests now. We really have revolutionized the way we do things in education.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Great.
Does anybody? I'm going to leave the floor open for a minute, and if not, then I'm going to wrap it up. Does anybody have a last little comment they'd like to make, or comment about Common Core or anything like that? Because I think this has been truly educational and helpful. I know that our listeners are going to get a lot from it. So, Alex, I really want to thank you for coming on today, taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I hope hopefully people can visit that website because it's so user-friendly, the corestandards.org. Check that out, and I think that it will, people rely on that as opposed to Fox News or something like that. Then the standards themselves would be far less demonized.
Thank you so much. And Samantha, I want to thank you for coming on today, even though you're a girl. But thanks for coming on and sharing your perspective on Common Core. And gentlemen, we'll see you guys next week. So thank you.
All right, thanks guys.
So much.
Okay.